This is the simple two-meeting system that I give to founding teams to stop those small, unsaid things from turning into a co-founder breakup. The weekly operational sync and the co-founder date. Most co-founder relationships fail when small things go unsaid because it creates what I call emotional debt that calcifies into resentment. You end up creating these two different, often competing realities with two distinct stories that never intersect. And then your own confirmation bias comes in and starts to filter everything that you observe. And then you start eventually wondering why you're blaming one another instead of just focusing on executing. I'm Dr. Matthew Jones, and I help co founding teams fix their partnership before it costs them their company. Now, in my work with founding teams, most co founder conflict that I see starts because of the absence of structure, the absence of a regular protected time and space where founders actually work on their relationship. You've heard it 100 times. It's important to work on your business, not just in your business. But when it comes to creating a strong, resilient partnership that grows and scales alongside your company, you need to work on your relationship, not just in it. And the sync date system helps you do exactly that. And just to start, the most common objection I hear is, Matt, we don't need to schedule another meeting. We talk to each other all day. Our desks are right next to each other. But there's a meaningful difference between just passive time together and the transactional communication that actually, that usually happens in those settings, and the deeper, more relationally, more focused type of conversation that I'm talking about. Most of your conversations are going to be using operational language, which is efficient and it's necessary for handling the business operations, right? But the challenge is that doesn't lead to the deeper, more vulnerable, more challenging conversations that you two actually need to be having, because those are really easy to avoid. And in fact, every part of your body is going to be saying, "Oh no, don't bring that up. Like, we have so many other things to focus on." So I get it. But without a container for that deeper layer, it just gets suppressed. And that's how emotional debt starts to accumulate. And it either accumulates and contributes to the rigidity of your own perspective, like I was mentioning before, and or it's going to interfere with your business, because that's exactly why a product debate, for example, turns into a frustrating multiple hour long conversation about roles and responsibilities. Right? If you stop working on the relationship long enough, then the thing that should have been just like a 15-minute agenda item ends up becoming the reason that one of you is threatening to leave. So I want to help you prevent that. So let's start by just briefly reviewing the weekly operational sync. So the frequency is something that happens typically weekly. It's non-negotiable, and it's important to keep even whenever you're well aligned. The duration can be anything from 10 to a half hour type of thing. You don't want it to be super long, because again, this is not focused on strategy. This is not focused on processing difficult emotion. This is really sticking strictly to the operational language, so the language of business. So this is tactical and just more pointed. So the agenda for this meeting is pretty simple. You can ask things like, what did we each commit to last week? What are the updates there? How did we execute? What are our company priorities? Are we aligned there? Do you need my support this week? Etc. And just other typical firefighting type combos. The whole point here is just to get really clear and focused on what makes the business move forward. What needs to be unblocked. Now, this is something that you're already probably doing to some extent. I'm just wanting to really make sure that there's a clear structure for both the business and then this relational component that I'm going to talk about next. So meeting two is the co-founder date. And I call it the co-founder date because years and years ago, I was working with this team who said, Matt, it sounds like you're asking us to date one another again. It's almost like, we're this old unhappy couple who lost the spark and you're wanting us to spend more time together. And I said, you know what? That's not wrong. That's pretty spot on. And it does parallel exactly what the Gottman Institute talks about whenever they talk about the State of the Union meeting. And so the entire purpose here is for us to focus on the relationship so that we can make meaningful progress and feel more connected to one another. So in terms of frequency, this is something I would recommend 1 to 2 times a month, at minimum once a quarter. And ideally, if you can throw in an offsite every now and then, that could be really helpful as well. But as it pertains to just this meeting, I would say it needs to be 60 to 90 minutes. And the language you're going to be using is that psychological language, that deeper, more emotional, more reflective language where you can get to these deeper parts of yourself and your own identity, right? And if you could ask no other question in this meeting, the single most important one to ask is, how are we doing? Because that we and how are we doing opens up meta communication. It opens up talking about how we are working and communicating with one another. And that's a key entry point to this working on the relationship instead of just existing within it. That gives you the power to name patterns that are challenging and prevent this accumulation of emotional debt. And so, whenever I zoom out, I think that your ability to have this conversation is probably going to be one of the biggest predictors of how a founding team responds under pressure. So, to give you a metaphor here, the Gottman Institute talks about this emotional bank account, right? And they use it as a metaphor basically to say, hey, look, when you are turning toward one another and responding to these bids for connection, and you're emotionally attuned and you're available, you're responsive, then when you go through hardship, when one of you is really critical, or you're just emotionally depleted and exhausted, you have sufficient balance to where those withdrawals, those negative interactions or whatever, there's enough buffer for you to still survive and to still have a degree of relational satisfaction. But the challenge to apply this to co-founders is that the startup environment often necessitates so much focus on business and not enough on those positive interactions that your balance is so low. And so what can happen is you get into this kind of debt that I'm talking about, and that's what then leads to a lot of dysfunction and a lack of resilience whenever things get hard, because you know, when you're withdrawing and there's nothing left in that bank account, that's whenever all these negative stories start coming up about what's going on in your co-founder's head. And that's exactly what this meeting is built to help prevent. And one important note that I would say that you need to keep in mind as it pertains specifically to these co-founder dates is that you need to actually protect this time. Like, these syncs and dates are really easy to just delay, and they're the first things off your calendar whenever things get busy. But that's exactly how and when emotional debt compounds. And the problem with emotional debt is, like, it's like a loan with variable interest. So in the fast-paced environment that you're operating in, it becomes really difficult to pay that off. And so therefore, actually, if you can be more proactive and paying down that debt earlier and building up your resilience in your emotional bank account, that's going to help you build in the buffer that you need so that when things get difficult, you're not creating an existential risk for your company. You're not at the point that one of you might choose to leave. Your co-founder relationship is too important to leave to chance, so please subscribe and grab the co-founder effect below, and I'll show you exactly what to do with it.